The sun hung low over the jagged ridges of the Arizona Territory, painting the barren landscape in shades of crimson and gold. The year was 1889, and the frontier stretched endlessly before those brave or foolish enough to claim it. Wind-carved mesas stood like ancient sentinels against the horizon, their red stone faces bearing witness to centuries of struggle between man and nature. Emma Whitfield stood on the porch of her modest homestead, shading her eyes against the dying light. Dust devils danced across the parched earth, swirling past the weathered fence posts that marked the boundaries of her small ranch. At 26, she was already a widow, her husband Samuel taken by fever just 8 months prior. The consumption had eaten away at him slowly, leaving her to watch helplessly as the strong man who'd brought her west withered into a shadow. She wiped her hands on her worn calico dress. The fabric faded from countless washings in the relentless desert sun. The day's work was far from done. The chicken coop needed mending where coyotes had tried to break through the previous night, and the well pump required another adjustment. Samuel had always handled such repairs with ease, his large hands sure and steady. Now those same tasks seemed monumental to her smaller frame. The nearest town, Copper Creek, lay 15 miles to the east, a collection of ramshackle buildings that passed for civilization in this untamed land. Emma made the journey once a month for supplies, enduring the sideways glances and whispered conversations that followed her like tumbleweeds. A woman alone on the frontier was an oddity, something to be pitied or preyed upon, depending on the observer's nature. As twilight deepened, Emma gathered her rifle from beside the door and made her rounds. The 3 horses in the corral nickered softly at her approach. She checked their water trough, finding it nearly empty despite filling it that morning. The desert was always thirsty, always taking more than it gave. A movement in the distance caught her eye. Riders approached from the north, their silhouettes dark against the purple sky. Emma's grip tightened on the rifle. Visitors after dark rarely brought good news. She counted 6 figures, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of lives spent in the saddle. As they drew closer, the breath caught in her throat. These were not the cowboys or drifters she'd grown accustomed to seeing. These riders sat their horses differently, their hair long and unbound, their clothing a mix of cloth and leather that seemed to blend with the desert itself. Apache. Emma had heard stories in town, raids on isolated ranches, conflicts with the army, the ongoing struggle between the indigenous peoples and the endless wave of settlers. But the men before her made no aggressive moves. They simply watched her as she watched them, the moment stretching taut as a bowstring. The lead rider raised his hand in a gesture that might have been greeting or warning. In the fading light, Emma could make out his features, sharp cheekbones, eyes dark as obsidian, perhaps 30 years of age. He wore a mixture of traditional Apache dress and adopted clothing, a rifle slung across his back. When he spoke, his voice carried across the distance in accented but clear English. "Water," he said simply. "For the horses." Emma's mind raced. Denying them could spark violence, but showing weakness might invite it just as surely. She thought of Samuel, how he would have handled this. But Samuel was gone, and she had only her own judgment to rely on. "The well is there," she called back, gesturing with her rifle barrel toward the pump. "Take what you need." The riders dismounted with economical movements. Emma noticed how the leader's eyes never left her, not with the leering assessment she'd grown used to from men in town, but with a wariness that matched her own. He was studying her as one might study a coiled rattlesnake, respectful of the danger, but not fearful. As his companions tended to their horses, the leader approached the porch slowly, hands visible, up close. She could see the wear of hard living etched into his features, scars that spoke of battles survived. Yet there was something else in his bearing, a dignity that transcended their circumstances. "You are alone," he observed. It wasn't a question. Emma raised her chin slightly. "My husband is inside?" She lied, feeling poorly, but his aim is still true. A ghost of something, perhaps amusement, perhaps respect, flickered across the Apache's face. He glanced at the house, noting the single lit lamp, the absence of any other signs of life, "The sickness took him," he said quietly. "The smell of death lingers." Emma's finger tensed on the trigger, but the man made no move toward her. Instead, he reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew something wrapped in leather. He placed it on the bottom porch step and backed away. "For the water," he said, without another word. He turned and walked back to his companions. They mounted their horses and melted back into the gathering darkness, leaving Emma alone with her racing heart and the mysterious offering. She waited long minutes before retrieving the bundle, her rifle ready. Inside the leather wrapping lay strips of dried meat, venison, by the look of it, carefully preserved. It was more than fair payment for water. It was a gesture of, what, respect, pity for a widow's plight? That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in the bed she'd shared with Samuel, the rifle across her lap, listening to every sound the desert offered. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind whispered secrets through the gaps in the walls. But her thoughts kept returning to the Apache leader's eyes, intelligent, assessing, strangely gentle despite the hardness of his life. When dawn broke, she rose and went about her chores with mechanical precision. But as she worked, she found herself glancing northward, wondering if she would see the riders again. The rational part of her mind said she should report the encounter in town, that the army would want to know about Apache movements in the area. Yet something held her back. They had done her no harm, had paid fairly for what they took, in a land where fairness was as rare as rain. That counted for something. The day passed without incident, but as evening approached, Emma noticed smoke rising from a distant ridge. Not the black smoke of destruction, but the gray wisps of a campfire. They were still near, perhaps watching. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, she felt an odd comfort in knowing she wasn't entirely alone in the vast emptiness. As she prepared her simple supper of beans and cornbread, Emma found herself setting aside a portion of the dried meat the Apache had left. She ate it slowly, savoring the rich flavor. It had been months since she'd had fresh game. Samuel had been too weak to hunt in his final days, and she dared not venture far from the homestead alone. Just as full darkness fell, the thunder of hoofbeats shattered the evening quiet. These riders came from the east, from the direction of town, and they came fast. Emma grabbed her rifle and stepped onto the porch, her heart sinking as she recognized the lead rider, Jake Morrison and his crew, 5 men who spent their days drinking and their nights making trouble. She'd rebuffed Morrison's advances in town last month, and the whiskey on his breath had promised this wasn't over. Well, Morrison slurred as he reined in his horse. "The widow Whitfield, all alone and hospitable-like. State your business and move on," Emma said coldly. "This is private property." Morrison laughed. An ugly sound. "Heard you've been entertaining savages out here." "That true, woman? You taking up with Apache now that your man's in the ground?" The other men spread out, trying to flank the porch. Emma's mind calculated angles, distances, the impossibility of holding off 6 men with a single rifle. "I said move on," she repeated, but her voice betrayed her fear. Morrison dismounted, swagger in his step. "Now that ain't neighborly. Boys and I rode all this way to check on you. Make sure you're safe." He was halfway to the porch when the arrow sprouted from the ground at his feet. Morrison froze, his eyes wide. A second arrow thudded into the post beside him, and suddenly the night came alive with war cries. The Apache materialized from the darkness like phantoms, surrounding Morrison's crew before they could react. The leader, the same man from the night before, sat his horse with bow drawn. Another arrow nocked and ready. "The lady asked you to leave," he said in that same measured English. Morrison's hand twitched toward his gun, but thought better of it. 6 drunk cowboys against an unknown number of Apache warriors was no contest. "This ain't your concern, savage," Morrison spat. But fear had replaced bravado in his voice. The Apache leader's expression didn't change. "Everything in this desert is my concern." He looked past Morrison to Emma. "Does this man trouble you?" Emma found her voice. "Yes." That single word sealed Morrison's fate. Not death. The Apache were too smart to bring that kind of retribution down on themselves. But humiliation. At a gesture from their leader, 2 warriors dismounted and efficiently stripped Morrison's crew of their weapons, tossing guns and knives into a pile. "You will leave?" The leader said. "If you return. If you speak of this in town. If you trouble this woman again." He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. Morrison and his men scrambled onto their horses and fled into the night, their departure considerably less bold than their arrival. The Apache watched them go, then began melting back into the darkness themselves. Only the leader remained, still mounted, studying Emma with those penetrating eyes. "Why?" she asked simply. He considered the question. "You showed respect. This is uncommon. I don't know your name." "Names have power," he said. "But you may call me Taza." "Emma," she offered in return. Taza inclined his head slightly, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or farewell. Then he too was gone, leaving Emma alone on the porch with a pile of confiscated weapons and the strangest feeling that her life had just taken a turn she could never have anticipated. She gathered the guns. They would bring good money in town, enough to see her through several months. As she worked, she realized the fear that had been her constant companion since Samuel's death had lifted slightly. She was still alone, still vulnerable, but perhaps not as helpless as she'd thought. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but it was also full of surprises, and somewhere out there in the darkness, an Apache warrior named Taza was watching over her. Emma wasn't sure if that thought should comfort or terrify her. She suspected it was both. The morning after Morrison's departure dawned clear and cold, frost glittering on the sparse desert grass. Emma woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the events of the previous night. Had it been real? The pile of weapons in the corner of her bedroom confirmed it had. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to tend the animals, her breath visible in the crisp air. Everything appeared normal. The horses dozed in their corral. Chickens scratched in the dust. The vast landscape stretched endlessly in all directions. Yet something had fundamentally shifted. The knowledge that hostile eyes might be watching no longer filled her with the same dread. Other eyes watched too, dark and protective. Emma tried to push thoughts of Taza from her mind as she went about her morning chores. There was no future in dwelling on an Apache warrior's unexpected intervention. Their worlds were too different, too divided by blood and history. She had seen what happened to women who crossed those lines, ostracized at best, dead at worst. Still, as she worked to repair the chicken coop, she found herself glancing toward the northern ridges. No smoke rose today, no sign of riders. Perhaps they had moved on, continuing their endless migration to stay ahead of army patrols. The thought brought an unexpected pang of disappointment. 3 days passed in solitude. Emma fell back into her routine. Dawn chores, midday repairs, evening preparations for another night alone. On the 4th day, she discovered her water barrel mysteriously refilled. Though she hadn't heard the pump working, fresh venison appeared on her doorstep, wrapped in the same leather as before. She knew she should be frightened by these silent visits, but instead felt oddly comforted. Someone was ensuring she didn't go hungry or thirsty. In a land where survival often meant taking from others, these quiet acts of giving stood out like stars in the darkness. On the 5th morning, while checking her snares near the creek bed, Emma found him. Taza sat cross-legged beside the water, so still he might have been carved from the red rock itself. His horse grazed nearby, and his rifle lay across his lap, but his posture suggested patience rather than threat. Emma's hand moved instinctively to the pistol at her hip, one of Morrison's weapons she'd taken to carrying. Taza's eyes tracked the movement, but he made no move of his own. "You are cautious," he said. "This is good." "You've been leaving food," Emma said. It wasn't a question. Taza inclined his head slightly. "The desert provides for those who respect it. I can't keep taking charity." Something flickered in his dark eyes. "Not charity, trade. For what?" He gestured to the land around them. "You do not despoil. You take only what you need. This is unusual among your people." Emma lowered herself to sit on a boulder across from him, maintaining careful distance. "My husband believed in living gently on the land, said it would provide if we didn't ask too much. A wise man. He was." Emma surprised herself by continuing. "Samuel grew up poor in Missouri. He understood hunger, understood want. When we came west, he promised we'd build something sustainable, not just take until the land had nothing left to give." Taza studied her with that intense gaze. "Yet he is gone, and you remain. Someone has to tend what we built." "Even alone? Even with men like those who came in darkness?" Emma's jaw tightened. "Especially then. Running would mean they won." For the first time, Taza's mouth curved in what might have been approval. He reached into his pack and withdrew something wrapped in cloth. "Your roof," he said, gesturing to her distant cabin. "The corner sags. Rain will come soon." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal pristine strips of sinew and curved bone needles, materials for repair that would outlast any town-bought supplies. "I can't," Emma began. "Trade," Taza interrupted. He pointed to her belt. "The knife. It was my grandfather's." Emma looked down at one of the knives she'd taken from Morrison's crew. The handle was decorated with intricate beadwork, clearly Apache craftsmanship. Morrison must have taken it as a trophy from some raid or skirmish. Without hesitation, she unbuckled the knife and held it out. Taza's fingers brushed hers as he took it, the brief contact sending an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with the morning chill. "Thank you," he said simply. But Emma heard depths of meaning in those two words. They sat in silence for a moment, the creek gurgling between them. Finally, Taza spoke again. "You will need to repair before the rains. I will show you. I know how to—" Emma stopped. He wasn't questioning her capability. She realized. He was offering to teach her the Apache method, techniques developed over centuries of desert living. "All right," she said. Over the following weeks, an unlikely routine developed. Taza would appear at unexpected times, sometimes at dawn, sometimes in the late afternoon, never at night, never when his presence might be construed as improper by either of their people's standards. He taught her to read weather signs and the flight patterns of birds, to find water by watching the insects, to strengthen structures using materials the desert freely provided. In exchange, Emma shared what she knew, English words he was curious about, methods of preserving food she'd learned from her grandmother, stories of places beyond the desert. Their conversations were careful, dancing around dangerous territories. He never spoke of his people's conflicts with the army, and she never asked about the scars that marked his arms and chest. But slowly, carefully, understanding grew between them. "Your name?" Emma asked one afternoon as they worked to repair her fence. "Taza. What does it mean?" He paused in his work, considering, "In your language." "Enough. My mother said I was enough for her, after my sisters were lost to the sickness." Emma heard the old pain in his voice. She knew about loss, about being the one who survived. "I'm sorry." Taza shrugged, but she had learned to read the tension in his shoulders. "The desert takes, it also gives balance." "Is that why you help me? Balance?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, "At first, perhaps. Now." He trailed off, but his glance toward her said what words couldn't. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks and turned back to her work. This was dangerous ground, more treacherous than any physical threat. She had seen the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking, had felt her own pulse quicken when he drew near, but to acknowledge it, to give it voice, would cross a line from which there was no return. The town of Copper Creek noticed her trips becoming less frequent. When she did appear, she traded Morrison's weapons for supplies, ignoring the whispers that followed her. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Dalton, cornered her near the grain bins. "Emma, dear," the older woman said, her voice dripping false concern. "People are talking. They say you've been seen with, well, with savages." Emma's spine stiffened. People say many things. Mrs. Dalton, not all of them worth repeating. But surely you understand the danger. A woman alone, accepting help from Apache bucks. I accept help from no one. Emma cut her off. I trade fairly for what I need, as my husband taught me. Mrs. Dalton's eyes narrowed. Your husband would roll in his grave knowing you consort with the very savages who what? Emma's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Who have shown me more respect in 2 months than the civilized men of this town showed in the 8 months since Samuel died. Who have ensured I don't starve while good Christian folk gossip about my circumstances? She gathered her purchases and left without another word, but she could feel the weight of judgment following her. The ride home seemed longer than usual, the landscape more desolate. Taza was waiting by the well when she arrived, and the sight of him eased something tight in her chest. He took in her expression, the rigid set of her shoulders. The town troubles you, he observed. Emma began unloading her supplies with sharp, angry movements. They speak of things they don't understand, judge what they fear. This is the way of people, yours and mine both. She turned to face him. Does your tribe know you come here? His silence was answer enough. Then we're both fools, Emma said bitterly. Taza moved closer, close enough that she could smell the sage and leather scent of him. Perhaps, but I would rather be a fool than a coward. Their eyes met and held. The air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities, with wants that couldn't be voiced. Emma's hand rose of its own accord, fingers barely grazing the scar that ran along his jaw. How? She whispered. Soldiers, he said simply. I was young, foolish, thought I could fight them all. And now I know better. I fight only battles I can win. Is this a battle? His hand covered hers, pressing her palm against his face. The most difficult kind. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then the distant sound of hoofbeats broke the spell. Taza stepped back, his body tensing for threat. But it was only a dust devil on the horizon. The sound a trick of the wind. Still, the interruption had served its purpose. Emma turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. You should go, she said quietly, before someone sees. Taza nodded, understanding more than her words conveyed. But before he mounted his horse, he spoke again. The storm comes in 3 days. Your roof. I'll manage. Emma. The way he said her name made her close her eyes. You do not have to manage alone. But he left without waiting for response. And Emma was grateful. She didn't trust what she might have said, what she might have admitted in the gathering dusk. That night, she lay wakeful, listening to the wind test her walls. In 3 days, the storm would come. And with it, perhaps, a reckoning she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The storm arrived exactly as Taza had predicted, rolling across the desert like a living thing. Emma watched from her window as the sky turned an ominous green-black, lightning crackling between the clouds. She had done what she could to prepare, secured the animals, reinforced the roof corner with the sinew Taza had given her, gathered extra water. But as the first fat raindrops began to fall, she knew it wouldn't be enough. Within an hour, the gentle patter had become a deluge. Water poured through gaps she hadn't known existed, pooling on her floor. The wind howled like a wounded animal, tearing at the boards Samuel had nailed with such care. Emma rushed from leak to leak with buckets and rags, fighting a losing battle against the storm's fury. The roof corner she'd repaired held, but another section began to sag under the water's weight. She climbed onto a chair, trying to brace it with a wooden pole, when a massive gust of wind shook the entire structure. The chair tilted, and Emma fell hard, her ankle twisting beneath her. Pain shot up her leg as she tried to stand. The ankle wouldn't bear weight. She dragged herself to the bed, shivering in her soaked clothes as water continued to pour in. Outside, she could hear her horses whinnying in distress, but she couldn't reach them. Couldn't even reach the rifle by the door if predators came, drawn by the animals' panic. Thunder crashed directly overhead, the sound so loud it seemed to shake her bones. In the brief illumination of lightning, she saw him, Taza, standing in her doorway like an apparition, water streaming from his hair and clothes. "Your horses," he said without preamble, then disappeared back into the storm. Emma could hear him working outside, his voice cutting through the wind as he calmed the frightened animals. Long minutes passed before he returned, soaked to the skin but moving with purpose. He took in the scene, the leaking roof, her position on the bed, the way she held her injured ankle. Without asking permission, he knelt beside her and examined the injury with gentle, knowing hands. "Not broken," he said, "but damaged." He moved through her small home with swift efficiency, placing pots beneath the worst leaks, using the tarp from his pack to create a temporary barrier against the rain. When he'd done what he could, he turned back to her. "You need warmth," he said. Emma was shivering uncontrollably now, her wet clothes leaching heat from her body. But propriety warred with necessity. "I can manage." "You cannot." His tone brooked no argument. "You will become ill. Your people die from the shaking sickness." He was right. She'd seen pneumonia take stronger people than her, with shaking hands. She gestured to the trunk at the foot of the bed. "Dry clothes. If you could, turn away." Taza moved to face the wall without comment. Emma struggled out of her sodden dress, gasping as the movement jarred her ankle. She pulled on dry clothing as quickly as her numb fingers would allow. "All right," she said. Taza turned back and began building up the fire in her small stove, feeding it with wood from her dwindling pile. Soon, blessed warmth began to fill the room. He disappeared outside again and returned with more wood, where he'd found dry fuel in this deluge. She couldn't imagine. As the worst of the storm's fury passed, they sat in unexpected companionship. Taza had wrapped her ankle with strips torn from his own shirt, the binding firm but not painful. He'd positioned her near the stove with blankets piled around her. "Tell me," Emma said, needing to fill the strange intimacy of the moment with words. "Tell me about your people, not the raids or the fighting. Tell me how you live." Taza was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. He told her of following the seasons, of ceremonies that marked the turning of the year. He spoke of his grandmother, who could find healing plants even in the harshest drought, of his father, who had been a great hunter before soldiers' bullets found him, of the pride in his mother's eyes when he'd completed his warrior training, and the tears when she'd sent him away from the reservation to avoid the fate of so many young Apache men. "We are not what your people say," he said quietly. "Not only, we love our children, honor our elders, seek to live in harmony with the land, but harmony is difficult when others come to take everything." Emma thought of her own grandparents, driven from their farms in the east by banks and progress. Perhaps we're not so different. My people were pushed west too, told to find new lives in empty land. Except the land wasn't empty. "No," Taza agreed. "It was not." They sat in silence, listening to the storm's gradual retreat. Finally, Emma asked the question that had haunted her for weeks. "Why do you really help me?" "Taza." He stared into the fire for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My sister was like you, strong, stubborn. She tried to bridge two worlds, married a Mexican trader who promised to protect her. When the soldiers came to our camp, she stood between them and the children. They shot her anyway." Emma's breath caught. "I'm sorry. I could not save her, but when I saw you that first night, facing 6 men with 1 rifle and no fear," he shrugged. "The spirits sometimes give us second chances. I'm not her, Taza." "No," he agreed, finally meeting her eyes. "You are yourself. This is more complicated." The weight of unspoken feelings hung between them. Emma knew she should send him away, should rebuild the walls between their worlds. Instead, she heard herself asking, "Teach me more words, in your language." A small smile touched his lips, the first real smile she'd seen from him. What words? Water, sky, friend. He taught her, patient with her clumsy pronunciation. The Apache language was unlike anything she'd encountered, all flowing sounds and subtle tones. She learned that a single word could have many meanings depending on inflection, that concepts she took for granted in English had no direct translation. What about... She hesitated, then forged ahead. What's the word for someone who stands between worlds? Taza's expression grew thoughtful. We would say one who walks in shadows. It is not a comfortable thing. Is that what you are? Yes, and you as well. Now. The truth of it settled over her like a weight. By accepting his help, by sitting with him through the storm, she had already crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The town's whispers would become shouts. The suspicious looks would turn to outright hostility. I'm not afraid, she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. You should be, Taza replied, but his eyes said something different. The storm had passed, leaving only gentle rain pattering on the damaged roof. Taza rose, checking the makeshift repairs. These will hold until morning. I will return to help properly fix them. You don't have to... Emma. The way he said her name stopped her protest. Let me do this. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He gathered his things, preparing to leave. At the door, he paused. The word you wanted. For someone between worlds. There is another term. What? Heart-torn. It means one whose spirit is pulled in two directions. Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the rainy darkness. Emma sat alone by the dying fire, her ankle throbbing, her mind churning with everything said and unsaid. Heart-torn. Yes, that captured it exactly. Torn between safety and risk, between the known world and the unknown, between what her life had been and what it might become. She thought of Samuel, wondered what he would make of all this. He'd been a practical man, but also a kind one. Would he understand the choice she was moving toward, or would he, too, warn her of the dangers? As she prepared for sleep, Emma noticed Taza had left something behind, a small leather pouch containing herbs, Apache medicine for her ankle. She held it to her nose, breathing in the sharp, clean scent. Such a small gesture, but it spoke of forethought, of care. Outside, coyotes sang to the clearing sky. The desert was washing itself clean, preparing for whatever came next. Emma closed her eyes, the Apache words he'd taught her running through her mind like a prayer. Water, sky, friend, heart-torn. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The town would need to know about the storm damage, would offer help that came with judgment attached. She would have to decide how much to accept, how much to reveal. But tonight, warm and dry despite the storm's fury, with the memory of Taza's rare smile to keep her company, Emma allowed herself to simply be grateful. The desert had tested her and found her worthy. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same strength, even if that strength led her farther from the world she'd known and deeper into the shadows between. The morning after the storm dawned crystal clear, the desert washed clean and gleaming. Emma tested her ankle carefully, finding it stiff but functional thanks to Taza's ministrations. True to his word, he appeared just after sunrise with materials for proper repairs, not just supplies, but knowledge passed down through generations of desert dwelling. They worked in companionable silence through the morning, Taza showing her how to weave supports that would flex with the wind rather than fight it. By midday, the roof was more solid than it had been even before the storm. Emma stood back, admiring their handiwork, when the sound of approaching wagons made them both freeze. A procession of townspeople crested the ridge, 3 wagons loaded with lumber and supplies. Emma recognized Mayor Hutchinson's distinctive black carriage leading the group. Her heart sank. They'd come to help, but their help always came with strings. Go, she urged Taza quietly. Please. He melted away with the fluid grace she'd come to expect, vanishing into the landscape as if he'd never been. Emma barely had time to compose herself before the wagons rolled into her yard. Mrs. Whitfield, Mayor Hutchinson called out, his florid face showing concern that didn't reach his eyes. We heard you weathered the storm alone. Simply unacceptable. A woman in your position shouldn't have to face such trials without community support. Behind him, Emma saw familiar faces. Tom Bradley, the blacksmith. Reverend Mills. Several ranchers' wives, including the insufferable Mrs. Dalton. They dismounted and began unloading supplies without waiting for invitation. "That's very kind," Emma managed. "But as you can see, I've managed the repairs already." Mrs. Dalton's sharp eyes took in the fresh work, the Apache-style reinforcements. "How industrious and how unusual these techniques are. Wherever did you learn them?" "My husband was a man of many talents," Emma said carefully. "Indeed." Reverend Mills stepped forward, his thin face grave. "Mrs. Whitfield, we've come not just with materials, but with a proposition. The Watson family has offered to take you in. Their eldest son, Joseph, has recently returned from San Francisco, quite successful in business. He's in need of a wife who understands frontier life." Emma felt the trap closing. "That's generous, but I'm not looking to remarry." "Come now," Mayor Hutchinson interjected. "You can't mean to continue this solitary existence. It's unseemly and, frankly, dangerous. Why, we've heard reports of Apache raiders in the area." "I've seen no raiders," Emma said truthfully. "Only travelers passing through." Tom Bradley, who'd been examining her roof repairs, called out, "These bindings are Apache work, no mistaking it." A ripple of unease passed through the group. Mrs. Dalton clutched her shawl tighter. "Emma Whitfield, have you been consorting with savages?" "I've been trading fairly with anyone willing to help me survive," Emma replied, lifting her chin. "Which is more than I can say for some." "Now see here," Mayor Hutchinson began, but Reverend Mills raised a hand. "Mrs. Whitfield, we're concerned for your soul as much as your safety. These heathens, they're not like us. They don't understand Christian values, the sanctity of proper behavior. A woman in your position is vulnerable to their influences." Emma felt anger rising like bile. "Their influences? You mean like ensuring I don't starve? Like fixing my roof so I don't die of exposure? Like seducing vulnerable widows?" "Mrs. Dalton burst out. "Oh, we've heard the stories. Apache bucks taking white women, filling their heads with savage notions." "Enough." Emma's voice cut through the diatribe. "I think you should all leave." Mayor Hutchinson's face darkened. "Now you listen here. Young woman, this community has standards. We've tolerated your eccentricities out of respect for your late husband, but there are limits. If you continue down this path, consorting with the enemy—" "Enemy?" Emma laughed bitterly. "The only enemies I've faced have been men from town who thought a widow was easy prey." "Where was the community then? Where were Christian values when Jake Morrison and his drunken friends came calling?" The group exchanged uncomfortable glances. They'd heard about Morrison's humiliation, though the details remained murky. "That's different," Reverend Mills said weakly. "Is it? A woman alone, trying to maintain her home, her dignity. If accepting help from those willing to give it makes me a pariah, then so be it." Joseph Watson himself stepped forward then, a soft-looking man with pale hands that had never known hard labor. "Mrs. Whitfield, please reconsider. I'm offering you respectability, security, you'd want for nothing." Emma looked at him, really looked, saw the calculation in his eyes, the assumption that she should be grateful for his interest. "Accept freedom. Accept the right to make my own choices." "Foolish woman." Mrs. Dalton spat. "You'll rue this day when those savages show their true nature, when you're found dead or worse." "I said leave." Emma's hand moved to the pistol at her hip. "Now." The sight of the weapon, one of Morrison's guns, they'd all recognize it, sparked another wave of whispers. But they began moving toward their wagons. Mayor Hutchinson turned back one last time. "You're making a grave mistake, Mrs. Whitfield. This town has a long memory." "Then remember this," Emma replied. "I asked for nothing but to be left in peace." "You're the ones who keep bringing war to my doorstep." They departed in a cloud of dust and indignation. Emma stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge, then sank onto her porch steps, shaking. She'd burned bridges today that could never be rebuilt. The town would turn its back on her now. Completely and finally. You spoke with courage. She looked up to find Taza emerging from behind the barn. How long had he been listening? I spoke with anger, she corrected. It may have cost me everything. He sat beside her, closer than he'd ever dared before. What is everything? Their approval, their chains disguised as kindness, their stores, their supplies. I can't survive on trading with— She gestured helplessly. With Apache? He smiled that rare smile. We have survived longer than their towns. We know secrets of this land they will never learn. It's not just about survival, Emma said quietly. They'll come back. With the army, maybe. They'll say that we what? His voice had dropped. Become something dangerous and tender at once. That we speak as equals, that we share knowledge, that we— He stopped, but his hand covered hers where it rested on the step. The touch was electric, forbidden, everything she'd been warned against, and yet it felt more right than anything had since Samuel's death. I'm afraid, she admitted. Fear is wisdom, but what do you fear most? Them or this? He squeezed her hand gently. Emma turned to face him fully, saw in his eyes the same struggle she felt, duty against desire, safety against truth. I fear losing myself, becoming something I don't recognize. You will not lose yourself. You will find yourself. This is what they truly fear. A woman who knows her own mind, her own heart. A dust devil swirled across the yard, and with it came memory of the night before, the storm. His gentle hands tending her injury, the word he'd taught her, heart-torn. Teach me, she said suddenly. Not just words or repairs. Teach me to survive without them, to live free. Taza studied her for a long moment. This is not an easy path. My people will trust you no more than yours trust me. We would walk between worlds, belonging to neither. I already belong to neither, Emma said. At least this way. I choose my exile. He stood, pulling her up with him. Then we begin, but first— He reached into his pack and withdrew a bundle. Your town. They brought wood and nails. I bring this. Inside was clothing, not Apache dress, which would have been too much, too soon. But practical frontier wear adapted with Apache knowledge, reinforced with sinew, decorated with subtle beadwork, designed for movement and survival rather than propriety. It was my sister's, he said quietly, altered for trade with Mexican merchants, neither Apache nor white, between worlds. Emma held the garments carefully, understanding the magnitude of the gift. I'm honored. Tomorrow, you learn to move silent, to read signs, to shoot not just with anger, but with purpose. He paused. If this is truly your choice. She thought of the life she'd been offered, Joseph Watson's pale hands, Mrs. Dalton's rigid propriety, the existence bounded by others' expectations. Then she looked at Taza, scarred and strong, offering not safety, but freedom. It's my choice, she said firmly. He nodded once, then mounted his horse. Rest your ankle tonight. Tomorrow, your education begins. As he rode away, Emma stood holding his sister's clothing, feeling the weight of the day's decisions. She'd crossed a line with the town that couldn't be uncrossed, but perhaps that line had always been an illusion, a barrier maintained by fear rather than necessity. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of fire, somewhere in that vastness. Taza was making camp, probably explaining to suspicious companions why he spent so much time near the white woman's ranch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, new dangers. But tonight, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced since Samuel's death. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. The future was uncertain, even frightening, but it was hers to shape. She went inside and tried on the altered clothing. It fit as if made for her, practical and strangely beautiful. Looking at herself in Samuel's old shaving mirror, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. Neither holy white nor Apache, neither widow nor maiden, neither settled nor wild. Heart-torn, yes, but for the first time, The tearing felt like growth rather than destruction, like a seed splitting open to send out new roots. Painful but necessary. Tomorrow, her real education would begin. The desert transformed under Taza's teaching. What had once seemed barren emptiness revealed itself as a landscape rich with meaning. Every track in the dust a story. Every plant a potential resource. Every shadow a possible shelter or threat. Emma learned to move quietly across the rocky ground, to find water where none seemed to exist, to read weather in the behavior of insects and birds. But as her skills grew, so did the danger. Word of her choices had spread beyond Copper Creek. Twice, she'd found surveyors marking her property boundaries, claiming abandoned land. Both times, they'd retreated when faced with her rifle and newfound confidence. But Emma knew they'd return with legal papers, backed by men who wanted to see her gone. The Army's presence had intensified as well. Patrols passed near her ranch weekly now, always asking about Apache sightings, always eyeing her adopted clothing with suspicion. Captain Nathan Harris, who led the local garrison, had taken a particular interest in her situation. Mrs. Whitfield, he'd said during his latest visit, his blue eyes cold beneath his campaign hat. I'm concerned about reports of your associations. These Apache are not tame Indians. They're renegades, hostiles who've refused reservation life. I've seen no hostiles, Emma had replied. Only people trying to survive, same as me. That's a dangerous attitude. Ma'am, these savages killed 3 settlers near Tucson last month. And how many Apache did those settlers kill first? The words had escaped before she could stop them. Captain Harris's face had hardened. I'd be very careful, Mrs. Whitfield. Very careful indeed. Now, as autumn painted the desert in subtle golds and browns, Emma found herself caught between 2 worlds at war. The town had effectively shunned her. No merchant would extend credit. No neighbor would acknowledge her presence. But Taza's people remained equally wary, accepting her presence only because of his vouching, watching her always with guarded eyes. She was returning from checking her trap lines when she saw the smoke. Not cook-fire smoke, this was black and ugly. Rising from the direction of the Apache camp, Taza had finally, cautiously, allowed her to visit. Emma spurred her horse to a gallop, dread settling in her stomach like stones. The camp was devastation. Wickiups burned, supplies scattered and destroyed. Bodies lay crumpled in the dust, elders and children who couldn't flee fast enough. Emma dismounted on shaking legs, moving among the carnage with growing horror. She recognized faces. The old woman who'd grudgingly shown her how to prepare acorn meal. The young mother who'd smiled shyly at her attempts at Apache words. Taza! She called his name. Desperate. Searching. Movement from behind a burning shelter caught her eye. Not Taza, a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, clutching a bleeding arm. She recognized him as Nayeli, Taza's nephew. The child's eyes were wide with shock and fear. Emma approached slowly, hands visible. Nayeli, it's me. Where is Taza? The boy pointed north with his good arm. Fighting. Soldiers came at dawn. Too many. Emma tore strips from her shirt to bind the boy's wound. How many escaped? Some. Not many. Hoofbeats made them both freeze. Emma pushed Nayeli behind a rock outcropping and drew her pistol. But it was Taza who appeared, leading a small group of survivors. His face was streaked with ash and blood, not all his own. When he saw her, something flashed in his eyes. Relief, fear, anger, all at once. You should not be here, he said harshly. I saw the smoke. This is what comes of connection. They track us easier now. Say we raid ranches. His voice was bitter. Your ranch. Emma felt the accusation like a physical blow. I know. The anger drained from him, leaving only exhaustion. But truth matters little to those who want war. The survivors, perhaps 20 from a camp that had held 3 times that, gathered what they could from the ruins. Emma worked alongside them, no longer an outsider, but not quite family. The distinction mattered little in the face of such loss. As the sun set, they made temporary camp in a hidden canyon. Emma helped tend wounds, distributed what food she'd carried. The Apache spoke in low voices, planning. Some wanted to flee to Mexico. Others spoke of joining the Broncos, the fighters who still resisted reservation life with violence. Taza sat apart, staring into the small fire. Emma approached carefully, sitting close but not touching. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "No, this was coming regardless. The army wants us gone, to reservations, to graves. They care little which." He turned to her. "But you cannot stay with us. And after this, I cannot come to you. They will watch your ranch now, waiting." Emma felt something tear inside her chest. "So that's it? We just stop? What would you have us do?" His voice was raw. "Continue until they hang me and burn your ranch, until more children die because we—" He stopped, jaw clenched. "Because we what? Taza?" He looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw everything they'd carefully not said these past months. "Because we forgot that some bridges cannot be built, some rivers cannot be crossed." "I don't believe that." "Then you are a fool." But his hand found hers in the darkness, gripping tight. They sat in silence, watching sparks rise toward stars. Around them, the remnants of his band prepared for another displacement, another loss. Emma thought of her comfortable ranch, still standing, still safe because of her white skin. The guilt was almost unbearable. "I could come with you," she said. "Leave everything." "No." His voice was firm. "You would die, or cause more death. My people tolerate you for my sake. But tolerance is not acceptance, and the army would hunt us harder, knowing a white woman rode with us." "Then what do we do?" Taza was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Finally, we survive. Apart, as we must." Nayeli approached then, his arm in a sling Emma had fashioned. He spoke rapidly in Apache to Taza, who nodded and replied. The boy turned to Emma. "Uncle says you saved me. I thank you." The English was careful, newly learned. Emma smiled through her tears. "Be strong, Nayeli." The boy straightened, trying to look warrior fierce despite his youth. "I will fight them, all of them." "No," Taza said sharply. "You will live. Fighting is easy. Living is hard. Choose hard." Dawn came too soon. The band would move south, toward the Mexican border and possible safety. Emma would return to her ranch, to face whatever consequences awaited. As the camp prepared to depart, Taza walked her to where she'd hidden her horse. "This is not ending," he said, "only pausing. The wheel turns, seasons change, perhaps." Emma agreed, though neither believed it. He reached into his pouch and withdrew something small, a piece of turquoise wrapped in silver wire. "This was my grandmother's. She gave it to my mother when she married outside the clan. My mother wore it until she died." He pressed it into Emma's hand. "It means you are remembered." Emma had nothing comparable to give. Instead, she pulled him close, pressing her forehead to his in the Apache gesture of deep affection he'd taught her. They stood that way for a long moment, breathing the same air, sharing the same grief. "Be careful," she whispered. "Please. And you. The town will not forgive. The army will not forget. You must be stronger now than ever." She pulled back to look at him one last time, memorizing his face, the strong plains, the scars, the eyes that had seen too much but still held kindness. "May I hold you?" she asked, echoing words she didn't yet know he would speak again. Instead of answering, he stepped back. "Go, before the scouts return." Emma mounted her horse, looked back once at the ragged band preparing for exile. Taza stood watching her, still as stone. She raised her hand in farewell, then turned her horse toward home. The ride back was the longest of her life. Every hoofbeat took her farther from one world without delivering her back to another. She was suspended between belonging nowhere, carrying only memory and a piece of turquoise that seemed to burn against her palm. The ranch appeared untouched, but Emma saw the signs, tracks of many horses, items displaced. The army had searched in her absence. On her door, a notice was nailed. By order of territorial authority, Emma Whitfield is commanded to appear before the Citizens Committee to answer questions regarding harboring of hostiles and activities contrary to public safety." She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. They would try her in their court of public opinion, force her to condemn or be condemned. But what could they take that hadn't already been lost? Inside, she found they'd ransacked her home, looking for evidence of her crimes. Samuel's photograph lay broken on the floor. She picked it up carefully, studying her late husband's face. What would he think of who she'd become? Would he understand that sometimes survival meant choosing between different kinds of death? As night fell, Emma sat on her porch, Taza's gift clutched in her hand. Somewhere to the south, the survivors made cold camp, afraid to light fires that might draw pursuit. Somewhere to the east, Captain Harris probably wrote reports about Apache sympathizers and the need for harsh measures. And here, suspended between, Emma Whitfield sat alone, but not quite lonely, carrying within her the seeds of two worlds that might, someday, find a way to grow together. The desert wind sang its ancient song, indifferent to human grief, but within its whisper, Emma heard echoes of Apache words, of lessons learned, of love neither spoken nor surrendered. Tomorrow would bring the Citizens Committee, the accusations, the choice between betrayal and defiance, but tonight she simply held tight to turquoise and memory, and refused to let go. The Citizens Committee convened in Copper Creek's largest building, a granary that doubled as courthouse and church depending on the day. Emma entered with her head high, wearing her regular ranch clothes rather than the Apache-influenced garments. No need to provoke them further. The turquoise pendant lay hidden beneath her collar, a secret weight against her throat. The room was packed. It seemed every soul in 50 miles had come to witness her judgment. At the front sat Mayor Hutchinson, Judge Coleman, Reverend Mills, and Captain Harris, the latter in full uniform, his presence making clear this was more than a civil matter. "Mrs. Emma Whitfield," Judge Coleman intoned, his voice carrying the weight of predetermined conviction. "You stand accused of harboring hostile Apache, providing them with aid and comfort, and conduct unbecoming a Christian woman. How do you answer?" "I answer that I've broken no law," Emma said clearly. "Trading with travelers isn't a crime." "Travelers," Captain Harris stood, his voice sharp. "The Apache who attacked the Garrett Ranch were no travelers. 3 people dead. Mrs. Whitfield, a woman and 2 children. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "What? When?" "4 days ago, the same band you've been entertaining." He made the words sound filthy. "We tracked them from the scene. Their trail led past your ranch. That's impossible. The Apache I knew would never—" "The Apache you knew?" "Mrs." Dalton's voice rose from the crowd. "Listen to her, speaking of those murderers like they were neighbors." Judge Coleman banged his gavel. "Order, Mrs. Whitfield. Did you or did you not provide supplies to Apache renegades?" Emma's mind raced. The Garrett Ranch was 30 miles east, 4 days ago. Taza's band had been fleeing south after the Army's attack. They couldn't have been in both places. But saying so would reveal how much she knew of their movements. "I traded fairly with anyone who came peacefully to my door," she said finally, "as is my right on my own land." "Your land." Mayor Hutchinson stood now. "Your husband's land, you mean—" "And how long do you think you'll keep it, with your reputation? No decent man will have you now. No bank will extend credit. You've made yourself a pariah for what? For savages who'd kill you soon as look at you. You know nothing about them." Emma shot back. "Nothing about—" "We know they're murderers," someone shouted from the crowd. "Kid killers." The room erupted. Emma stood isolated in a sea of hatred, feeling the weight of their judgment. Captain Harris raised a hand for silence. "I've requested additional troops from Fort Grant," he announced. "We'll run every last Apache out of this territory, and anyone who helps them—" His eyes fixed on Emma. "Anyone who helps them will be treated as an enemy combatant. You can't threaten civilians," Emma protested. "I can when they consort with the enemy during wartime." Harris stepped closer. "Where are they, Mrs. Whitfield? Where did your Apache friend take his band?" Emma met his cold gaze. I don't know.
Liar, Mrs.
Dalton again. She knows. Make her tell. Judge Coleman's gavel cracked repeatedly. Mrs. Whitfield, this committee offers you one chance at redemption. Provide information about the hostel's whereabouts. Help us prevent more innocent deaths. Emma thought of Nayeli's frightened eyes, of the burned camp, of elders cut down while fleeing. Innocent deaths, like the Apache children your soldiers killed 4 days ago. Where was your committee then? Shocked gasps filled the room. Captain Harris's face darkened. No action was taken against any Apache camp 4 days ago. Then your scouts are lying to you. I saw the bodies myself. Children, captain, elders, shot while running away. If you were there, Harris said slowly. Then you know where they went. Tell us. The trap was neat, well sprung. Emma remained silent. Judge Coleman sighed theatrically. Very well. Emma Whitfield, this committee finds you guilty of seditious behavior and giving aid to enemies of the territory. You are hereby ordered to vacate the Whitfield Ranch within 7 days. The property will be auctioned to cover the costs of increased military patrols necessitated by your actions. You can't do that. Emma stepped forward, fury overcoming caution. That's my home. My husband's grave is there. Should have thought of that before you took up with savages. Someone called out. Furthermore, Coleman continued, you are forbidden from leaving the territory until Captain Harris determines you have no further intelligence value. Any attempt to flee will be considered admission of treason. Emma stood stunned. They were taking everything. Her home, her freedom, her future. All for the crime of seeing humanity where they saw only enemies. I'll fight this, she said quietly. With what money? What lawyer? What friends? Mayor Hutchinson smiled coldly. You've burned every bridge. Mrs. Whitfield, no one will help you now. The committee dismissed her with contemptuous finality. Emma walked through the hostile crowd, feeling their hatred like physical blows. Outside, she found her horse untouched, small mercy, and rode hard for home. The ranch looked different knowing she would lose it. Every fence post Samuel had set, every improvement they'd made together, every memory soaked into the sun-baked wood. She had a week to disappear into nowhere, with no resources and no allies. That night, she sat with Samuel's Bible, trying to find comfort in familiar verses. But the words seemed hollow now, speaking of justice and mercy she'd seen precious little of. She dozed fitfully in her chair, startling awake near midnight to find a shadow at her window. Not Taza, she knew instantly. This presence was unfamiliar, dangerous. Emma reached for her rifle as the door crashed open. 3 men burst in, bandanas covering their faces. Not official law, then vigilantes. Apache lover, one growled, advancing. Gonna learn you proper before you go. Emma fired, the shot deafening in the small space. The lead man cursed, clutching his shoulder. The others rushed her. She swung the rifle like a club, fighting desperately. But they were too many, too strong. They bound her hands, arguing among themselves. Just scare her, one said. Not here to kill nobody. Speak for yourself. The wounded one snarled. Bitch shot me. They dragged her outside, toward the barn. Emma's mind supplied terrible possibilities, each worse than the last. But as they crossed the yard, arrows whispered from the darkness. One man screamed, shaft protruding from his thigh. Another sprouted from the wounded man's back, dropping him. The third vigilante released Emma, spinning wildly, shooting at shadows. Where are they? Where? Taza materialized behind him like smoke, knife glinting. The man dropped without a sound. Emma stood frozen as more shapes emerged, 6 Apache warriors. Faces painted for war, not the remnants of the massacred camp. These were Broncos, the fighters who'd never stopped resisting. Taza cut her bonds without speaking, his face unreadable in the moonlight. He checked her for injuries with clinical efficiency, then turned to his companions. They spoke in rapid Apache, gesturing at the bodies, the ranch, her. You came back, Emma whispered. Watched. Waited. His voice was different. Harder. More dangerous. These men? Vigilantes. The town. They're taking my ranch. Gave me a week to leave. One of the warriors said something sharp. Taza responded curtly, then faced Emma. You come with us. Taza, I can't. You said yourself. That was before. Now they hunt you too. Stay. You die. Come. Maybe die. But maybe live. Emma looked at her home. Her life. Everything she'd fought to preserve. Then at the bodies cooling in her yard. At the men who'd come to save her when her own kind came to harm her. Let me gather supplies, she said. She packed quickly. Ammunition, medicine, preserved food. The few valuables she had left. Samuel's photograph. The Bible, though she doubted she'd open it again. Practical clothes. At the last moment. She changed into the garments Taza's sister had worn. No point in pretense now. When she emerged, the warriors had dealt with the bodies, loading them onto horses. They would leave them somewhere to be found. She realized a message. Taza helped her mount, his hands lingering a moment on hers. You understand? No returning. You ride with us. You become enemy to all whites. Forever. Emma thought of Mrs. Dalton's hatred, Captain Harris's threats, Judge Coleman's smirk. I already am. They rode out as dawn touched the eastern sky, leaving the Whitfield ranch to stand empty. Emma didn't look back. Couldn't. That life was finished. Killed as surely as if they'd put a bullet in it. The Broncos set a hard pace, speaking little. They were different from Taza's peaceful band. These were men forged by war, shaped by loss into weapons. They tolerated her presence for Taza's sake, but she felt their skepticism like a physical weight. By full daylight, they'd covered 20 miles of brutal terrain. When they finally stopped to rest the horses, Emma's body ached from the unfamiliar pace. Taza brought her water, crouching beside her. The men they'll find. Your town will blame us. They'd blame you anyway, Emma said wearily. At least this time it's true. You regret? She looked at him, really looked. Saw the new scars, the deeper lines around his eyes, the weight of leadership he'd never wanted. No, she said simply. No regrets. One of the warriors called out, riders visible in the distance. Army patrol, moving fast. Without a word, the band mounted and melted into the landscape. Emma carried along like a leaf on floodwater. This was her life now, running, hiding, existing in the margins. No home but what she could carry. No safety but what speed and cunning could provide. She'd chosen the Apache over her own people. Chosen love over security. Chosen truth over comfortable lies. As they rode deeper into the wild country, Emma fingered the turquoise at her throat. Remembered. Yes, she would be that. Whatever came next, death, capture, or unlikely survival, she would be remembered. By Taza, if by no one else. And in this land of shallow roots and forgotten promises, perhaps that was enough. The Fort Grant stockade reeked of despair and unwashed bodies. Taza sat shackled in the corner of the overcrowded cell, his wrists raw from the iron restraints. 2 weeks had passed since his capture, 2 weeks of interrogation, starvation, and the peculiar torture of civilization's cages. Around him, other Apache prisoners huddled in their own misery. Some Broncos like himself, others simply guilty of existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Captain Harris visited daily, always with the same questions. Where were the other hostiles? Who led them? Where did they cache their weapons? Taza met each query with silence, even when that silence earned him the boot or the rifle butt. His body bore new bruises layered over old, but his spirit remained unbroken. He'd learned long ago that pain was temporary. Surrender was forever. The Apache witch, one guard had called him, spitting tobacco juice near his feet. Won't even scream, like he don't feel nothing. But Taza felt everything, the ache of separation from his band, the weight of leadership abandoned, and most of all, the gnawing uncertainty about Emma. Had she escaped with the others? Was she adapting to the hard life of the hunted? Or had they caught her too, subjected her to treatment he didn't want to imagine? The cell door clanged open. Captain Harris entered. But this time, he wasn't alone. Judge Coleman followed. his face pinched with distaste at the smell. Behind them came a figure that made Taza's heart constrict. Emma, flanked by 2 soldiers. Her hands bound but her head unbowed. She was thinner, her skin bronzed by sun and wind, wearing the traditional clothing he'd given her. But her eyes still held that fierce light that had first drawn him. When she saw him, something flashed across her face. Relief, anguish, love, all compressed into a moment before she schooled her features to stone. "Well, Taza," Harris said, using his name for the first time, "your woman's been most uncooperative. Perhaps seeing your condition will loosen her tongue." They'd caught her 3 days ago, Emma realized, during a supply raid gone wrong. The Broncos had scattered, most escaping. But she'd been thrown from her horse, captured before she could follow. 3 days of questions, threats, promises, all met with the same silence Taza now demonstrated. "Mrs. Whitfield," Judge Coleman began, his voice oily with false concern. "Surely you see the futility of protecting these savages. Look at your friend. Is this the noble warrior you sacrificed everything for? He'll hang regardless. But you could still save yourself. Tell us where the others hide." Emma looked at Taza, really looked, saw the bruises, the hollow cheeks, the dignity that no amount of abuse could strip away. Their eyes met and held, speaking volumes in silence. "I've told you," she said quietly. "I don't know." Harris backhanded her casually, the crack echoing in the stone cell. Taza surged against his chains, earning a rifle butt to the ribs from a guard. Emma tasted blood but didn't flinch. "Enough games," Harris snarled. "We know you rode with them for weeks. We know he's their war chief. Bodies have been piling up across the territory, raids on supply wagons, attacks on patrols. That blood is on your hands too. Woman." "The only blood on my hands," Emma said clearly, "is from tending wounds your soldiers inflicted on children." Coleman shook his head theatrically. "Such delusion. The Apache have corrupted you entirely. But perhaps—" He smiled, an expression that promised nothing good. "Perhaps a different approach is needed." He nodded to the guards, who unlocked Taza's shackles and hauled him to his feet. They dragged him to the center of the cell, forcing him to his knees. One produced a leather strap, thick and well-worn. 20 lashes, Coleman announced. "For every question Mrs. Whitfield refuses to answer." "No!" Emma lunged forward but was held fast. "This is illegal. He's a prisoner of war." "He's a savage who never signed no treaty," Harris corrected. "The rules of civilized warfare don't apply." The first lash fell with a sound like a gunshot. Taza's body jerked, but he made no sound. By the 5th, blood seeped through his torn shirt. By the 10th, Emma was sobbing, begging them to stop. "Then tell us," Coleman pressed. "Where are they?" Emma looked at Taza, even through his pain. His eyes commanded her to silence. She bit her lip hard enough to draw fresh blood and shook her head. The lashes continued. 15, 20. They paused, letting the moment stretch. "Well?" Harris demanded. Emma's voice came out cracked. I don't—" Again, Coleman ordered. "Stop!" The word tore from Emma's throat. "Medicine Mountain. They cache supplies near Medicine Mountain. There's a box canyon on the north face." She gave them enough truth to be believed, mixed with enough lies to buy time, described trails that existed but led nowhere useful, water sources that would be dry this time of year. The interrogators took notes. Asked clarifying questions, she answered with desperate invention. When they finally dragged Taza back to his corner, Emma tried to go to him but was held back. "I need to tend his wounds," she pleaded. "Savages heal themselves," Harris said coldly. "Take her to the women's stockade. We'll verify this information, if she's lied." He left the threat hanging. As they dragged her away, Emma managed one last look at Taza. His lips moved, shaping words in Apache she'd learned. Be strong. Live. The women's section of the stockade held a different kind of misery. 3 Apache women, 2 Mexicans accused of helping raiders, and now Emma, the white woman who'd chosen the wrong side. They gave her a moth-eaten blanket and a spot on the filthy floor. One of the Apache women, elderly but unbowed, studied her with sharp eyes. After a long moment, she spoke in accented English. "You are the one who rode with Taza's band." Emma nodded, too exhausted for pretense. "He lives?" "Yes, but—" Emma's voice broke. "They hurt him, because of me." The old woman made a dismissive gesture. "Warriors expect pain. But you, why did you speak? Why give them anything? To stop the torture, pain stops, death stops. But shame." The woman shook her head. "That follows into the spirit world." Emma wanted to protest, to explain about mercy and compassion and the unbearable sight of Taza's blood. But looking into the old woman's implacable face, she understood. In trying to save him from physical pain, had she inflicted a deeper wound? Days blended together in confinement. Emma learned the rhythms of prison life, the meager meals, the daily counts, the constant presence of despair. Through whispered conversations with the other women, she pieced together the larger picture. The army was mounting a final campaign to clear all free Apache from the territory. Those who surrendered would be sent to Florida, to die slowly in humid exile. Those who resisted would simply die. On the fourth night, commotion erupted outside. Gunfire, shouting, the thunder of horses. Emma pressed against the barred window, hoping against hope. But it was only a patrol returning with prisoners. More Apache, mostly women and children, herded like cattle into overcrowded cells. Among them, Emma spotted a familiar face. Nayeli, Taza's nephew. The boy who'd fled the burned camp with his arm in a sling now walked with the hollow eyes of one who'd seen too much. Their eyes met through the bars, his widening in recognition. That night, the old woman taught Emma the Apache death song, the words strange on her tongue but carrying a mournful beauty. "You may need it," the woman said matter-of-factly. "They will hang Taza soon. Maybe you too, if their search finds nothing." Emma thought of the false trails she'd given. The soldiers probably chasing ghosts through empty canyons. Yes, they would discover her deception soon enough. But maybe, just maybe, it had bought the free bands time to disappear deeper into Mexico. On the seventh morning, they came for her. Not to the interrogation room this time, but to the courtyard where a gallows stood stark against the dawn sky. Emma's heart stopped. Were they hanging her without trial? But no, they chained her to a post with clear view of the platform. This was to be a lesson. They brought Taza out in chains, along with 2 other warriors. He walked steadily despite his wounds, meeting death with the same dignity he'd met life. His eyes found Emma's across the courtyard, and in them she saw not accusation, but something almost like peace. Captain Harris read the charges: murder, theft, incitement to violence. The litany seemed to go on forever. Through it all, Taza stood straight, the morning sun catching the silver in his hair. "Any last words?" Harris asked. Taza looked directly at Emma. "May I hold you?" he asked in English, his voice carrying clearly across the space. The guards laughed, not understanding. But Emma did. The question that encompassed everything: love, regret, the impossible dream of connection across worlds that couldn't meet. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, knowing he could see. "Savage gibberish," Harris dismissed. "Proceed." "No!" Emma fought against her chains, screaming, begging, but the lever was pulled, the trap dropped, and Taza's body jerked once before going still. The world went gray at the edges. Emma heard screaming, her own, she realized distantly. They left the bodies hanging as warning, left her chained there until she had no more tears, no more voice, nothing but hollow ache where her heart had been. When they finally returned her to the cell, the old Apache woman held her as she shook with soundless sobs. "Now you understand," the woman whispered. "Now you are truly one of us, not in blood, but in loss." Emma clutched the hidden turquoise pendant, the last physical connection to the man who'd shown her freedom even as it led to both their destructions. Outside, she could hear the army band playing some patriotic tune, celebrating another victory over the savages. But in the darkness of the cell, surrounded by women who'd lost everything to progress and manifest destiny, Emma began to sing the death song she'd learned. Other voices joined her. Apache and Mexican and white united in grief. They could take everything: land, freedom, life itself. But they couldn't take the memory of a love that had transcended boundaries, or the knowledge that for one brief season, two hearts had beaten as one despite all the world's fury. The song rose through the bars, carrying on the desert wind to wherever spirits went when their bodies were done with suffering. And Emma sang until her voice gave out, honoring the man who'd asked, in his last moments, for the one thing neither of them could have: to hold and be held, without fear or judgment, in a world that allowed no such grace. The dawn sky painted itself in shades of blood and ash, a fitting canvas for what was to come. Emma stood at the edge of the parade ground, her hands bound, surrounded by soldiers who watched her with a mixture of contempt and unease. 3 days had passed since Taza's execution, 3 days in which she'd existed in a state between life and death, her body present, but her spirit elsewhere. Captain Harris had discovered her deception about Medicine Mountain within hours. The patrol had found nothing but empty canyons and dry springs. His fury had been cold and calculated, resulting in her current situation standing before a military tribunal that would decide her fate. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The attack came from 3 directions at once, Apache warriors materializing from the desert like avenging spirits. Not the remnants of Taza's peaceful band, but hardened Broncos led by someone Emma recognized: Goyacla, the one the Mexicans called Geronimo. The warriors struck with devastating precision, clearly informed of the fort's routines and weaknesses. In the chaos of gunfire and war cries, Emma found herself forgotten. A stray bullet shattered her bonds, and she ran, not knowing where, only away. The fort erupted in flames. The Apache had learned to use the white man's weapons against him, including fire bottles that turned wooden structures into infernos. Through the smoke, she saw him, Naili, no longer a boy but a young warrior painted for war. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the gate. "Uncle said you might live," he shouted over the din. "Come!" They ran through streets turned battlefield, past soldiers and warriors locked in deadly struggle. At the fort's edge, horses waited, including, impossibly, Emma's own mare, taken when she was captured. Naili boosted her up, then mounted his own horse. "Ride south," he commanded. "Don't stop." "What about you?" His young face was fierce with purpose. "I have debts to pay. Uncle's death demands blood." "Go!" Emma wanted to protest, to tell him that Taza wouldn't want this cycle of vengeance. But bullets whined past, and there was no time for philosophy. She spurred her horse and fled into the desert, the sounds of battle fading behind her. She rode hard through the morning, following trails Taza had shown her, finding water where others would see only stone. By afternoon, exhaustion forced her to rest in a hidden canyon. There, beside a tiny spring, she finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of loss. Taza was gone. The life she'd built with Samuel was ashes. The new life she'd tried to forge between worlds had led only to death. She was 30 years old, alone in hostile desert, wanted by both the army and likely some Apache who blamed her for their losses. The sensible thing would be to ride to Mexico, disappear into some border town where questions weren't asked. Instead, she found herself riding toward the one place that still called to her, the ruins of her ranch. The journey took 2 days of careful travel, avoiding patrols and settlements. When she finally crested the ridge overlooking her former home, Emma's breath caught. The building stood intact but empty, already showing signs of abandonment. Tumbleweeds gathered against the porch where she'd first seen Taza. The well pump hung silent. She dismounted slowly, walking through spaces that held too many memories. In the barn where vigilantes had tried to assault her, she found hay still in the loft. The house echoed with absence, Samuel's absence, her own absence, the absence of a future that might have been. But on her kitchen table, placed precisely in the center, lay an eagle feather. Emma picked it up with trembling hands. Someone had been here. Someone who knew Apache customs. Eagle feathers were sacred, given only for acts of great courage or to mark significant passages. Beneath it, scratched into the table's surface, were Apache symbols she recognized, the signs for remembered and courage, and something else that might have been hope. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. Emma reached for a knife, knowing it would be little use against armed soldiers or vengeful warriors. The door opened. It wasn't soldiers. It wasn't warriors. It was the old Apache woman from the stockade, accompanied by two younger women Emma didn't recognize. They regarded each other in mutual surprise. "You escaped," Emma said unnecessarily. The old woman's lined face creased in what might have been a smile. "The young warriors think only of killing, but some of us remember other ways. We go to Mexico, to family there." "You?" Emma gestured helplessly at the empty house. "I don't know. I thought I needed to see it again. The past is a heavy burden," the old woman said, "but sometimes we must carry it to find our future." She studied Emma with those penetrating eyes. "You loved him." It wasn't a question, but Emma answered anyway. "Yes." "Then honor him by living, not as white, not as Apache, but as yourself. The woman who walked between worlds and survived." One of the younger women spoke rapidly in Apache. The old woman nodded, then turned back to Emma. "She says there is a settlement, 3 days south, mixed people, Apache, Mexican, even some whites who married into the tribes, outcasts, but alive. You could find place there. I don't know if I belong anywhere anymore. Belonging is not given, it is made." The old woman reached into her pouch and withdrew something, a small piece of turquoise, sister to the one Emma wore. "Taza left this with me before his capture. Said if you lived, you would understand." Emma took the stone, feeling its cool weight. 2 pieces of the same whole, separated but still connected, like the 2 worlds she'd tried to bridge, like the love that transcended death. "Thank you," she whispered. The women left as quietly as they'd come, melting back into the desert. Emma spent one last night in her empty house, sleeping on the floor near where her bed had been. In the morning, she gathered what few useful items remained: tools, seeds Samuel had stored, a few books that had escaped looters, at Samuel's grave. She knelt and spoke to the man who'd brought her west with dreams of building something lasting. "I tried," she told the simple wooden marker. "I tried to keep what we built, but maybe building isn't about structures. Maybe it's about connections, understanding. I think you would have liked him. Samuel, I think you would have understood." She placed a small stone on the grave, a tradition Taza had taught her, marking that the dead were remembered. Then she mounted her horse and rode south, toward an uncertain future, but away from a past that could no longer hold her. The settlement the old woman had described proved real, a cluster of adobes beside a reliable spring, populated by people whose faces showed the mixing of bloods and cultures. They asked few questions of the white woman who spoke Apache phrases and wore turquoise like a talisman. She traded her skills, reading, writing, the medicine Samuel had taught her, for food and shelter. Slowly, carefully, Emma built again. Not a ranch this time, but a life. She taught children who carried heritage from multiple worlds. She learned to weave from an old Mexican woman who'd married an Apache scout. She helped birth babies who would grow up belonging to no single culture, but to all of them. Sometimes, in the evening when the desert winds sang through the settlement, she would hold the 2 pieces of turquoise and remember a warrior who'd offered water when he could have taken it. Remember stolen moments of understanding between 2 people who should have been enemies. Remember last words that were really a question about connection, about the human need to hold and be held. Years passed. The Apache wars ended with surrender and exile for most. The frontier closed, replaced by railroads and towns that sprawled across lands once considered too harsh for settlement. But in small places like Emma's adopted home, The old ways persisted alongside the new. She never remarried. Though opportunities arose, how could she explain that her heart remained with a man whose body lay in an unmarked grave, whose spirit rode eternal on desert winds? Instead, she became the settlement's memory keeper, writing down stories that would otherwise be lost, Apache tales told by grandmothers, Mexican ballads of love and loss, the experiences of those caught between worlds on quiet nights. Emma would sometimes walk to the edge of the settlement and look north, toward the lands where she'd loved and lost. The Apache believed that death was merely a journey to another country, that loved ones waited beyond the mountains of the spirit world. She didn't know if such beliefs could comfort a white woman whose faith had been shattered by too much loss. But she hoped. And in hoping, in remembering, in building bridges between the children of different worlds, she honored the man who'd asked with his dying breath for the impossible, to hold her once more. The desert endured, ancient and patient, and in its vast spaces, a woman who belonged to no single world but to all of them continued to live, to teach, to remember. She carried her scars, visible and hidden, like badges of honor. She spoke names the world wanted to forget, and told stories others feared to hear. And sometimes, when the sunset painted the sky in familiar shades of red and gold, she could almost feel him there, waiting just beyond sight, patient as the land itself, holding out his hand for a dance that death had interrupted but not ended. In the end, that was enough. Love remembered was love eternal, and in a land that devoured the weak and forgot the fallen, remembering itself was an act of rebellion. Emma Whitfield, who had been widow, rancher, outcast, and survivor, became something more, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of memories, a woman who proved that sometimes the greatest courage is simply to continue living when everything you've loved has turned to dust. The desert sang its ancient songs, and she sang with it, her voice joining the eternal chorus of those who loved, lost, and loved still. Thank you for listening to this tale from the American frontier. Where are you enjoying this story from? Please share your location in the comments so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Emma and Taza's story below.